Welcome to Safui, the podcast of the Africa Indigenous Knowledge Research Network. Your hosts are Dr. Chikezirim Nwoke, an anthropologist studying youth and livelihoods, and
Sika Kudjawu, a doctoral candidate researching the political history of African women, both at Carleton University.
We worked alongside our principal investigator, Dr. Samuel or John Oloruntoba, to bring you these critical conversations, made possible with support from MasterCard Foundation. Let's dive straight into our conversation.
Welcome to the African Indigenous Knowledge Research Network podcast. We are joined today by Professor Mary Fatima Setrana, the director of the Center for Migration Studies at the University of Ghana in Accra, who is the West Africa Chair on Forced Displacement funded by IDRC and is one of the 12 chairs globally. Professor Setrana's research interest intersects around migration and gender governance, migration governance and policy development, forced displacement and return migration and reintegration. As a leading expert in migration governance, Professor Setrana actively advises global institutions like the African Union and spearheads key research projects on migration and social transformation. Thank you for joining us, Prof. Can you share your personal journey in researching African Indigenous knowledge systems at the intersection of migration and social transformation? How did you enter this field of research and what context do you work in?
Thank you also for the opportunity. I see it also as a unique form of promoting my work, and also from where I sit as an African migration scholar, promoting not only my works, but also promoting the works of other experts within the field, because it's tailored towards the things I do. So thank you for that innovative approach to the podcast. My journey into the migration field and also the transformation, I think the journey itself is transformational in the sense that I started off as a sociologist who was interested in wanting to do something that is unique, something that I like doing, but again, something that will put me right in the spotlight of employment so that I could have money quickly and take care of my family back home because I'm from a family of 6 and I'm the third born. We all had to school and all that. So while I was going to school, I knew that one of the things I had to do quickly was to make sure that I secured a job. And so I started off with a topic in sociology which looks at branding, organizational culture, with the aim of one day working in a big company or even a bank. Along the line, although migration was not part of the journeys and the experiences I had thought of, it happened that as a sociologist doing MPhil in University of Ghana, there was this scholarship, they call it the Good Students. So we had to go to Norway for 1 year, which again, goes back to the issues of what we think is the best. And here the West is the best, in quotes. And so as an African student studying sociology, perhaps you need to go to Norway to go and study a course called Culture and Development, where you would see how the West have used their culture to develop. So I mean, that idea of go and learn, and so that it helps you, you come back, you contribute to society. And so upon going there, I still went with this, my rebranding of industrial knowledge, which is organizational culture. Perhaps that is also got me into the program. But while I was there, a year passed and I had to come back. And the pressure from home, are you coming? Don't come. Wait a little. Get up, give us some money. You know, we need to take care of this business here. Let's establish. Oh, do you think you'll find a job when you come back? I mean, all these questions started about 3 months into my final month of coming. And I was like, okay, I think everybody has a perspective. Because I knew I was going, because I had not finished with my MPhil. So I'll try to write up and come back, complete my MPhil and see what life has for me. But then the pressure, I didn't know that other people had other alternatives for me, such as stay there, try to make life over there, try to finish school, try to do, diverse alternatives that were proposed to me. So I felt pressured by that. And so I asked myself, maybe I need to study about this. And I'm a very qualitative person. So I just said, okay, let me study reintegration of returnees. One, what preparation do they do? What ideas? What informs their decision for coming back home? And when they come home, how do they adjust to the environment? So I started off with that. And so my thesis, which I started from my master's level, was actually on return and reintegration. And so all the publications you have cited are on return and reintegration, but it was born out of my own experience of the dilemma and the alternative decisions that I was given by colleagues and my own family members and myself to try to juxtapose and make a critical decision coming back. So finally, I came back and I pursued this program even to the PhD level. And so that's how I got into the field of migration, which also I think is transformational, because when we talk about transformation, social transformation looks at how, for instance, indicators like technology, indicators like culture, indicators like demography changes the fundamentals of our institutions and our well-being. I see it in my own work in different dimensions. So I see migration causing changes in the way we perceive things or live our lives, which could be the culture, which could be the population setup, which could be the social settings or the economic settings of us. But again, these other social transformation indicators could also impact on the migration, our experiences of migration. So here, to bring it back, the literature part back, or the theoretical positioning back to my own experience. So I had gone to study, yes, it was a migration, but then my subsequent lives and academic career have been dependent on what happened while I was at the destination. And it affects the fundamental of who you are and how you even carry out your research and how you perceive the people that you study. So maybe I'll just leave it here, and then as the conversation progresses, we can talk more. But this sets the foundation for my journey into the field I find myself now.
Well, this is really interesting and fascinating. Your connection of social transformation to personal transformation, and also how it connects to migration. It all comes together nicely. What about African indigenous knowledge? How have you approached it in your work so far?
Yeah, so talking about African indigenous knowledge, we need to look at what it means. I don't want to get into the complexities and the definitions of it, but does indigenous necessarily mean negative as it is portrayed? I don't think so. So I look at indigenous in a broader perspective. Yes, indigenous, like any other word, could have a complexity of outcomes. So it could be negative, it could be influenced negatively, it could be expressed negatively, it could be described negatively, but it also has positive sides of it. So depending on who is looking through or which lens you are looking at it from, you could define it in a certain way. And so if I talk about indigenous knowledge, I think that even per my positionality, I have been influenced. And I'm not sure you are also different from me, and I'll accuse myself first. So let me do a self-reflection, because I have been trained all my life to the extent that I have been asked to study abroad all my life. So after my master's, I went back to Netherlands again through government sponsorship. One of the best students, let's help her so she comes back to help us. Let her go to the best school. Let her go to have exposure from the Western, the so-called Western, so that she comes back to impact. And in fact, when you come back, I remember when I was defending my thesis, the remark I got was, you see how your exposure has helped you. I'm not sure if you could have done this if you were here. So I think per my position and the position of maybe our generation and even others, I have been influenced by the fact that West is the best. Now I'm trying to have a reflective view about it, a critical stand on it, but I don't think it's a day's job. It will take a process. So now coming to indigenous knowledge, when did I begin to know indigenous knowledge? When did I begin to appreciate it? I began to appreciate it through my work so I'm somebody who approaches indigenous knowledge through qualitative study, observation, doing interviews, participant observation, being with the people, understanding their culture, and using what they define or how they define concepts to describe the situation or perhaps to critically interpret the situation. Unfortunately, I have been groomed, and just like many other scholars, we've been groomed in a certain way where theories are taught from the West, where methodologies are taught from the West. Hardly would we even read African authors. We claim they are difficult to find, but even when they're on the reading list, we cunningly we find a way of skipping the reading. But indigenous knowledge, it's how we have been. I think that is how we have lived our lives. So let's go back to our traditional ways of collecting data or even disseminating data. It was through oral history. It was through dance. It was through drama. I mean, every part of a dance gives out information. Every part of a drama or even the cloth you wear has names, has symbols. I remember when I was doing my one of the ceremonies, I was bought a cloth that they called awaripa. Awaripa means good marriage. So that is a cloth that my auntie bought for me. I didn't understand until I came back for people to interpret it. So she's saying that you are going for marriage. This cloth is called awaripa. Enjoy your marriage. So that is how these are things that are meanings that have been derived from our society. So it's been part of us. It's just the transformation or the translation of those experiences into the academic field, which we missed out on because we were looking at the West as the best. And so for me, I think though it's been challenging, but it's something that we are all forcing to do. And I think all compelling ourselves and sacrificing that we achieve it. And I think this is a platform that is doing it, and it is very good. And I've seen other platforms also promoting it. And so I encourage that we do more of it using our own language, our own cultures, our own symbols to let them interpret the academic work that we do. It makes it easier to understand. So let me even give an example of a class where I was trying to interpret intersectionality. And then theory usually looks very abstract. But then I told them, have you seen the spider web before? They said yes. Have you seen a junction that has roots that crosses like the T? They said yes. Okay. So I picked an African symbol that has different webs and says that intersectionality. So each of these web nets represents something. It could represent an identity, it could represent a gender, it could represent something. So you see different elements or identities coming together to interpret intersectionality. So it's you need to understand even your context to be able to interpret the so-called Western to the level of the people that you communicate to within your context. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Your article on Janice's Face of Contemporary Migration looks at women's dual roles in preserving traditional knowledge and adapting to new environments, either home or abroad. How do women returning after migration or who decide to remain in the country of migration reconcile these roles, and what challenges do they face when they transmit indigenous knowledge to future generations?
Thank you very much. Yeah, so what comes of are two things. So there's a paper that is written by one Techua Menu, one of the African scholars. She talks about, in that paper, it's about intergenerational relationships. So grandmas versus grandmas versus mothers versus grandchildren. in Canada. So I will not quote it, but let me give a description of it, where she describes the tension between grandmothers and their grandchildren on one hand, and mothers and mothers. So here the mother and the grandmother on another hand, because they are trying to depict what happens at home elsewhere. So here in the context of Ghanaians in Toronto and how these things play out. So in Ghana and in West African countries, and I'm sure in your own experience, it's when you are back home, it is easy for grandma to, have some corrective measures for you. But then elsewhere, you need to tread cautiously before the police is called. So it will be unusual for a police to be called on a grandmother, because the grandmother decided to correct. So in the first place, these contextual issues are even different. So you need to play your cards well. And then when it comes to the women, yes, for women, actually from the studies I have done, women usually hardly do women want to return. So it's not that some women don't return. Of course, women like me, we've returned, and we don't intend to live abroad permanently. But most women, from the statistics and the studies that we have done, women prefer to live outside. One, because of the policies. So the policies that favor more women mostly. And so they enjoy the fact that these patriarchal norms, which puts the male ahead, it's somehow not, it doesn't even work in that context. So at least they have empowerment, they can take decisions on their own, they can take the economic decisions, they can work and be independent. Yes, so that is there. And so when they translate this into return, the studies I've done with return migrants, especially among educated migrants, it becomes a challenge. So for instance, couples, and in one of my articles, the one I talk about challenges of return and reintegration, you find couples struggling, and especially the woman, because here the woman is expected to go back to her domestic roles. Although this might have changed while she was outside, maybe she was in Canada, she was in US for several years. And here in US, they were both working. Anybody who came home early coach. Everybody roles were shared. Not whether intentionally or not, it did happen because you couldn't have two of them in the house at the same time. Now they come back home. The woman is still a career woman. The man is a career man, but the woman is expected to still play her domestic roles. And somehow the woman also expects the man to do her domestic, her breadwinning role. So I expect you to go back to your breadwinning role, and I expect you to go back to your domestic roles. However, we still want to enjoy what we used to have. And that's a struggle. So unless both of them come together to agree, in some cases, they never agree. And so I remember on the field, one returnee told me, Madam, when you finish with this study, can you also look at divorce rate among returnees? And I felt that was an interesting one. Surprisingly, most of the men I interviewed had divorced. So initially they come home with the women, and then somehow, some way, the women go back, and somehow, some way, they also get married and remarried. So he actually told me and proposed that, which I hope one day I will do that study. So because of the struggles, one, the fact that the woman is empowered for some time while she's at the destination, and is expected to roll back into her original roles without, or perhaps ignoring the empowerment she had, the power to take her own decisions, the power to decide whether she wants to do the domestic chores or not, the power that she had to decide what to do with her life, that somehow it's curtailed or sometimes even absent once they return. And so these are some of the challenges that particularly educated women face. But when it comes to those who are less educated, they didn't have problems. But again, they did appreciate that these changes had occurred. they did appreciate that, yes, the man didn't do as he used to do, but now they've gone back to the original ones, traditional roles they used to play before they migrated. And so sometimes I ask them, but that is what you think. So you wish you had that. And then they tell you that particularly in smaller communities or in rural communities, they felt that the community themselves wouldn't appreciate this change. So for instance, to see the man in the market with a basket buying things, no, the woman feels that the entire community would even disown her. And so she wouldn't even go there. And then how about her going to the farm to do all that she has to do? So this particular interview I had with a couple where they had a big farm. So the man goes to the farm, the woman is expected to be at home, take care of the kids. And I asked her what if they had to change? And she said that would also not be allowed by society. And so, yes, people may want to change in an urban setting because at least that in that space, you don't have the close knits watching what is happening to you. But when it comes to the rural setting or peri-urban areas, these are difficult for women to easily change, or even the man to maneuver their way through. So these are some of the challenges. And I remember some of the papers I've written on, I wrote one on social remittances. Some of the ladies who had returned from Canada, US said that, yes, because they returned and they were single, society looked down on them. And sometimes they described them as women with bad character, or sometimes they were sex workers or had negative connotations for them. But they felt that these were, there's not it's society's expectation forces them to live a certain life. But they felt that this was nobody's business. And so if they had decided to not get married, it shouldn't be a problem. And so to them, the way they were empowering younger ladies who had not migrated was to help them to be strong in their decisions and to find a better life for them before they married, as society would say. Those who didn't have children felt it's not a big deal, but it took them efforts. They needed to make efforts to make sure that they themselves were stable in their minds and in their emotions, so that they could also impact other younger ladies who also were in similar situations. But they felt the society created that high expectations, which had unnecessary negative impact on them.
Prof, thank you very much for that very insightful response. So still on the migration and returnees dynamics, women returnees often face challenges in re-entering into the labor market. Some leverage indigenous knowledge to create new opportunities for themselves. Can you discuss some of the ways that these women have used their migration experience to innovate within traditional industries, and how this has contributed to the economic empowerment and social standing?
Yeah, so talking about women and the labor market, I think generally when people are returning, I wouldn't only say that for women, although women face more challenges when they return, it's the same for both men and women. So in terms of because the unemployment rates are very high in generally in Ghana and in other West African countries and even beyond on the continent. And so generally, people who return, so I remember my PhD, I titled it Where to Live and How to Survive, because this was a title that came as I was interviewing return migrants, both male and female, although the men were more, because most women, the men returned without their wives. So I got more males than females, but even that, the females that I spoke to were also attested to the fact that they also struggled in terms of deciding to come. So one, did they have accommodation? Would they have jobs? Talking about insecurities in terms of economic and also adjusting to the environment. And there were also differences whether they were single or married. So those who were single were thinking about, one, would I find a suitable partner? How was I going to survive within the community with the pressure of saying you are aging and you are not married? And then those who were married were also concerned about, particularly the women, about their wives, their husbands being snatched by other women, and also the community pressure of not, if in case they don't have their private cars, or they had to rely on public transport, or they had to be in a rented apartment with other people. So already society has a certain expectation towards Europe and North America. And so that expectation, when people are returning, even before they get home, they begin to start thinking about how they would maneuver through or negotiate these expectations. And so I believe that that's part of that challenge is for all. And so people try to do more by, one, securing capital before they come. And even sometimes the way we have found transnational useful is that they do consistent travel. If they have the opportunity, they connect back with home, they read about their home countries, just to help them know what, for instance, if they have capital, what they can invest in. They rely on family members, what can I invest in? Or look for job, ask others to help them look for job. And so that process, I would say, is the same for all. But then upon return, what do different people do? And so sometimes people find themselves in jobs that are below their current status. So you may have a PhD certificate, but the employer says, I cannot pay you. And so I will employ you with your bachelor's or your master's. And some of them face this kind of brain, you call it descaling, some call it brain waste, which is a challenge. And then in other settings where they come with capital, so for instance, in the agric sector, now we are finding, not even in the TVET sector, originally some jobs have been designated for women. And so the question we ask ourselves is that if everybody is learning tailoring, if everybody is learning bead making, who makes the other person's beads? If everybody is doing hairdressing, who does the other one for the other? And so now people have been, especially the women, we are finding different green jobs and other innovative ways by which they can invest. And the agriculture sector is one of the ways by which women are investing in agriculture, fish farming. Some are doing intensive farming on large scales where they get the community to support. Here, the challenge they have found, which during my field work, I find a strategy people are adapting, is once they leave, they close the shop. So they may come for 3 months, 6 months during summer break. They employ a full set of employees, but once they leave, if it's a farm, they don't work on it again. It is left empty. If it's a shop, it is closed. So I asked them why. I mean, there is this perception that you may lose your customers, but they said they prefer that because sometimes when you leave it in the care of family members, most of the time, you come back and meet nothing, an empty shop, or sometimes an empty farm where your capital is mishandled. So some people prefer that, and these are things that we are finding. So again, when it comes to high family expectations and what people perceive about migrants, especially those who travel outside the continent, is a big challenge. And the expectations that leads to we relying on family members, and sometimes they themselves become a challenge and a problem. We need to address that because we don't have any other means of reintegration. Without the family, you cannot survive. It's a family chasing around for you. It's a family person doing this for you, doing that for you. So, but they are the same people. I remember one time a returned migrant told me that he was building. And then anytime, I mean, he was shown pictures. Just one day he said, no, somebody hinted him that it's better you come to see this building. So he called the sister and says, I'm not coming, but I'm asking my friend to bring you money. How much is left to complete? So, I mean, she said about $10,000 or $20,000. She said, okay, no problem. So the money this time around, I'm not remitting it through Momo or any bank transfer, but I will ask a friend to bring it. And she says, okay, that's fine. So they plan to meet, and he himself was there. The sister comes and he asks the sister. So the sister sees him and she's surprised. And apparently there was no building. There was an empty space, but the sister actually had a completed building, very nice. And when I met him, he says, since then, although he has buildings, he closes the shop, or he closes, he gives it out for maybe 3 months, 2 months, so that when he is leaving, he closes his gates, he empties the house, goes to live in Canada, comes back, and then move on with life. So these are some of the challenges. We cannot do without our families because government doesn't have a formalized system, but there are also challenges with the family system that we need to address.
Thanks, Prof. That's an interesting story, and we hear a lot of these narratives of having to rely on family and friends, and then the disappointments that could sometimes come out of it. This conversation on women and the labor market and employment brings us to another important aspect of young people. What is the current state of migration on the continent or in Ghana regarding the purported mass exodus of young people to the West? We hear so much of these stories on Bogrin and Jackpine, depending on what context you live in. And what is the implication on the preservation and application of indigenous knowledge with this exodus?
Yeah, thank you very much. So the Japa or the Burger or the all that, yes, it's true. But yes, people are moving. Recently, I was interviewed on the national TV and they were asking me whether it is true that there are more health professionals moving. Yes, they are moving, but statistically, I cannot confirm that they are more than those of us who are moving within the sub-region. No, we cannot say that. Statistically, 70% of people, particularly those of us in ECOWAS, because of the free protocol movement, we move frequently among ourselves. So Ghanaians going to Nigeria, Nigerians coming to Ghana, Burkina Faso, Niger, Senegal, that kind of movement records higher numbers than those going to Europe. But it's about, I mean, coming back to the whose narrative are we promoting here? And who are the actors? What is the media, the role of the media? So the role of the media is very key in this. If the media will promote the statistics, then it's fine. But because Europe has dominated the discourse of migration, and because they are consistently having a unified, but they claim within it are fragmented, a unified agenda towards Africa on migration to stop Africans from migrating, to criminalize migration. And so the perception out there is that everybody is moving through the irregular routes to Europe. No, it is not like that. There are many young, especially females. Females, when you check the history, females were the ones who started cross-border entrepreneurship. Because after the implementation of the structural adjustment program, most women lost out on their jobs. And so in order for them to survive and for their families to be taken care of, they began to trade across borders. So for instance, you can talk about some in Cote d'Ivoire, the roasting of plantain that a lot of scholars like Anefi have written about, has written on it. You can talk about other innovative ways of trading beyond borders. You can talk about Nigerians coming to Ghana. You can talk about within the continent, what people are trading in. And now the even more recently, about women trading tomatoes all over, things like salmons, things like clothes, being traded among ourselves. So this is very key that we need to highlight, that cross-border woman makes more money and takes care of the family. Even in the midst of COVID, when transportation and borders were closed, drivers were not moving because most drivers are males. It affected the family. But these women found ways of crossing foodstuffs across the borders in order to sustain their families. And there's a typical case that happened in Ghana where there was a midnight trading, or what we call the midnight market. So the government closed the whole country. Nobody was supposed to go out, just to find out that at 12 midnight, there was a big market after the police had gone to sleep, where the women were selling. Seriously, they were, I don't know how, which routes they used in getting there. And we were all surprised and astonished. But when we asked them, they said that was the only way to take care of their family. So they risked the policies the government had set up. And these were locations where in the daytime, you could see the police with their guns standing and working from. And that was exactly the market zone that had a lot of popularity during the COVID at midnight. And so these are some of the innovative ways that is already happening within the continent and across the sub-region, which we gloss over. So I think statistically, I wouldn't want to even jump into that discussion of mass exodus without touching on that. Now let's come to the so-called, which I like the way you describe it, so-called exodus. What is exodus? Does it mean that many people or many young Africans are migrating through the irregular routes? Is that what is being said? No, statistics doesn't show that. Most people are moving regularly. It's rather the few that are moving. Count the number of deaths, count the number of happenings, negative happenings or occurrences within the Mediterranean. You can't compare them to the regular movements. If the UN data is something to even come by, and the data sets on the different data sets on regular movements, then I don't think that is it. But it's about the promotion of the European agenda, which is weaponizing movement to the extent that even when you qualify to move, you are even stigmatized. It got to a time when I felt so bad that I was West African and I was going to Europe, even though I had documents, because you are asked questions that you wonder if these questions merit the person they are asking. And so I think we need to look at that. And let's look at Libya. Growing up, I knew lots of Ghanaians who worked in Libya as teachers, contractors. I also knew Nigerians who were in Ghana who sold things. I remember that small needle, which you will not find in any shop. You find it in the Alata woman's shop. That is the Nigerian woman. If you are looking for that tiny thing that you will not find in your supermarket, go to this Nigerian woman. We used to call them Alata woman. You will find it. So this has been among us. You find Lebanese trading in Ghana, Indians trading in Ghana. You find Ghanaians also trading elsewhere. You go to Gambia, look at the fishermen and fisher folks there. These are Ghanaians who have migrated along the coast to go and live there. And so there are a lot of trading activities. Otherwise, Africa wouldn't get up and say they want African continental free trade, because it's already happening. It's just a matter of synchronizing and ironing out a few outstanding issues to make these things better. So let me come back to the Libya issue. Before the destruction of Libya the way it is, we didn't hear issues of so much mass across the Mediterranean, because Libya was a one-stop shop for a lot of migrants. And so to them, that was their livelihood. To them, that was survival. That was opportunity for them until the collapse of Libya. And then we saw all that. But how did it happen? How did it all start? I don't think it started from us. And so it's about the external influences we are having that is making this whole picture and giving it a negative narrative. But again, let's come back to even the few numbers that are going through that. Still, we are not happy. It's because it's human life and we do appreciate it. But again, we also need our governments to up their game. We need, the lack of employment, the economic situation. They give all sorts of excuses to it, but coming back, we need to also strengthen our basic indicators. So for instance, employment, industrialization, we need to have jobs for the young people, and jobs not only targeting white collar jobs, but jobs that would transform our communities. We need more industrialization where we transform the raw materials into productive or even into a higher standard product that can be exported. So we have lots of foodstuffs, we have lots of raw materials, but we need to industrialize to make sure that these things are transformed into higher products that can trade on the international market. And so, yes, in terms of employment, we do need employment, but it's because we are also producing graduates without taking them through the process. So I always describe it as we have jumped the industrialization stage. We move from the bottom, instead of going through the industrialization stage that gives us employment, we jump to the final stage where we are enjoying the products of industrialization, but they are not coming from us. So we are importing everything to our countries. And so that is where the problem is. And so, yes, I know that various governments are putting up different things. So for instance, you go to Senegal, they have this agribusiness venture where they encourage young people to farm. They give them subsidy. The same in Ghana, they are doing that. We need to do more, and we need to sustain them so that people can have access to these jobs. And when people have better jobs, when people have basic services, I believe they would definitely enjoy their home countries. When you do the interviews and you ask about return, people want to come back home. They are not traveling with the intention of migrating to stay permanently. They one day know that they will come back home. And so once we make the environment conducive and provide the basic amenities, the health sector is efficient, the roads are good, electricity is provided, I believe many people would also want to make a better living here.
Thanks, Prof. Thanks for that expansive overview of migration and modern day migration and migration from time ago. I like how you pick to cross internal or regional migration and how it happens on a larger scale than this Western migration that is being sensationalized, if I should say. I recently watched in the past 3 years or 4 years, I've come across 2 movies that are anti-Western migration, and it just rubs me off the wrong way. The way, like you said, the weaponization of migration. Yes, it just rubbed me off the wrong way. So thanks for assuaging my feelings and all of these emotions I've had about those movies. I'm curious about the preservation and application of indigenous knowledge when it comes to migration, even the regional migration. How have you seen this regional and African regional migration when it comes to preserving or expanding on indigenous knowledge systems? Is that something you could speak on?
Yeah, so talking about African indigenous knowledge, I would want to go back to who we are as Africans. So if you read the migration literature, we trace our mobilities as far back as pre-colonial times. For instance, if you go to many West African countries, these ethnic groups will tell you they came from one place to the other. I remember, in my history class or in my social studies class, my teacher tells me that we are Akans, we came from the sky. The Gans came from somewhere in Nigeria, ended up on the sea. That's why they are by the sea. So it tells you that people came, and even there's one that says people came from the hole. Sometimes I get messed up with those who came from the sky. So there is mobility in our history. You cannot write our history without mobility. So to us, mobility is not a problem. It has always been a way to enhance our livelihoods, to give us exposure, and even to make you enjoy life. So you move out of your comfort zone, and then you come back refreshed, to the extent that even in our cultures, there is what we call fostering. The fostering system allows, even among royals, the chief needs to go to another community to serve another chief in some cultures, to gain experience and come back to make sure that you can rule your people. It is believed that when you sit at one place, you lack experience and cannot be a chief. In some contexts, people have been taken to other places so they could be better brought up. We call it a foster system. It's not different from what we are practicing now. Now they call it care. They call it caregiving. That's the English word for it. But it is a traditional system which we call fosterage. And it was normal for a young girl or boy growing up to live with your uncle or your auntie who lives in the city, so that you are brought up in a certain way with exposure. And that is how our communities developed. So it has always been part of us. And so that's why I'm saying that it was just a matter of translating these cultures into the academic circle, but we missed out on it in some of the contexts because we were made to believe that the West was the best. And so all the theories and all the concepts and methodologies that we were taught from primary school were all Western. And so development is taught from a Western perspective. But if we will turn the cards and then go back to who we are, this is how we are. We have always moved. And again, coming back to the indigenous knowledge, what is indigenous knowledge? I think indigenous knowledge is the way we perceive things, the way we interpret things. I remember some of my students, when we, even at the graduate level, we begin to talk about their work and how the theories work. And I tell them, can you say this in a local language? Let's do the thinking in a local language first. And it's amazing how the local language has the magic and the miracle of working. And then once they do that, I said, now can you put your English in this one? Or can you allow your English to translate it? Initially, it may not come up well, but just wait a while, it will be good. And so the point I'm trying to make is that it has always been part of us. That is how we have been brought up. The only thing we need was to translate it into our development, into our makeup in our career setting. Instead of becoming a career woman and a professor, leaving your wisdom behind, which my father used to call it the Efyenyansa. Efyenyansa is translated as the wisdom from home. So you may gain the book knowledge. They call the one you get from university or classroom as book knowledge, but they tell you there's a certain kind of wisdom which you can only gain by sitting under their feet. I don't think people may interpret it as a way of manipulating or showing being dominant or domineering because of their age. But I think there is a sense in that, because we need to learn the culture to be able to translate it. And so we've always done that, assuming that we were collecting the data and disseminating with our own ways of drama, music, dance. Oh, I don't know how the education would have been and how development would have been easily interpreted to our leaders. Now, the global settings have these English words, which I'm sure some of our leaders don't even understand, but they have to apply it. So a typical example is one, more recently, we did data collection in a certain community, and a mining community for that matter. So we had to go back to the community. And again, one of the things of using indigenous ways of doing things. So I approached the School of Performing Arts and I asked them, can you go into the community? Let's go with the young people, this time not the adults, because the adults gave the responses. The high school, let's tell them that this is the data we have from your parents. We want them to be translated into drama. Just play it out the way you want it. But again, with guidance. So we wrote the scripts knowing that we have the knowledge, we are the professors. So we wrote the scripts based on the transcript and we handed over to the students. Now, in a day before the workshop, we went there, and this professor who is leading the team said the students should rehearse. He said, Mary, we are in trouble. I said, what? The students have changed the story. I said, wow. How do we do it? It was 9 p.m. and the meeting was next day at 9 a.m. So we asked them why. They said the stories we told them were not their perspectives. And these are high school ladies and gentlemen. They told us that they think that their parents had given us not the true picture. So they had a certain version which they had added on to their parents. And so they will act if only, or they'll perform if only we allow them, because they had already rehearsed. Okay, so we didn't have any choice. So we told ourselves, this is another data collection. So the following day, they went to do the performance, and it was amazing. The message was direct. The message was, elders, just listen to us. If you think we are what you are doing, no, that is our future. I think you should be careful before you see. I mean, the message was just direct at the end. They changed the end story to make it it's a message to the community that if you were doing anything to destroy our land, to sell it out to migrants, we are aware and we are watching you. So be careful. And that alone was enough message. I mean, that alone has changed my perception towards the research work I do. The fact that I ignore certain portions, even certain vulnerable groups, and rely on some information. And this message went so down well with the people that the communication and the communique at the end of the program was impactful, because it was drama. They never forget it. They always remember that child who was the key player in it. So the use of that methodology was effective. The use of it to disseminate and to collect another version of the story, which we didn't have. And indeed, there is a methodology for it. There should be a word for it. We should be able to align it, because these are the best ways and the best approaches for collecting data in our context. You can't collect indigenous knowledge when the indigenous people are not at the center of the data collection. So we can't be at the center of the discussion when the indigenous people themselves don't have a voice in it. And so I believe that if we want to go the line of indigenous knowledge, not seeing it that is negative. Yes, the negative ones, I'm sure even by now, a lot of them have been transformed, although we still transform them. But we should see the positive sides and promote them, and not only use them when we are on the field, but see how we can bring them into the classroom and into the academic cycle, and even inform policies about them so that they can make better impact. I believe if we go this way, development will be easy instead of defining it in a certain way, a certain westernized way that takes away our context. I hope I have answered the question.
You have. Thank you so much, Prof. Your responses are very robust, and they take us in directions that we somehow do not expect. But then they bring out, or they tease out such rich knowledge and ideas, and we would even like to pursue some of them further. We read one of your excellent articles, Back Home at Last. This article, you discuss the factors influencing return and integration for Ghanaian returnees. And, you note that many young people return with a mix of modern skills and traditional values. And so we'd like to explore this further. How do these young returnees navigate the tension between modernity and tradition upon their return?
Yeah, so I remember that paper very well. I did a study, particularly, although it was a bit quantitative, but I did some cases with returnees. And I was asking them about their return and what they were doing. And so in that, I saw that people had come with certain skills. So while they were away, they were working in certain fields like the ICT sector, maybe they were working as engineers. And so when they came back, they brought those skills and began perhaps sometimes setting up some companies, or setting up some small scale businesses or medium scale businesses with those ideas. But what is also significant is the fact that some of them, upon starting, then connect back with their friends who had not come back, so that they could also help them enhance it. So sometimes they supported by bringing in some equipment from outside, either from Europe or from Canada, UK. Or sometimes they supported them with intermittent capital to make sure that the business was successful. And then I also interviewed some who were into agriculture. So some of the returnees had purchased large acres of land and some has started pineapple farm, depending on the location, poultry farm, anything that could support them. But the good thing is that most of them said they had witnessed these elsewhere from their destination countries. And so they come back with that skills, they come back with that knowledge, and then with the capital they have, they begin to invest back home. And so this is how they got the business idea. Even more recently, one of the people I spoke to was supplying goods. And then he noticed that his friends who were outside also kept bringing in different things so long as he found a need. So he moves into rural communities, find what rural people don't have, and then start supplying them. So he started with phones. Later, he started with goods that they couldn't also easily purchase around their community. So he goes into those communities to give them on credit, stays there for a week. Once you sell, he takes his money back. And then he also sends the money back to his partners who are outside Ghana. They purchase the goods and they bring them back to him. So these are different models that people have learned, even sometimes the introduction of some ideas, some of them, particularly packaging. People in the packaging field, when you ask them, they have learned the ideas, and even some institutions. So for instance, some international organizations also support returnees that come with these ideas so that they can establish themselves. Sometimes they give them seed funding. Once you have the idea, you just have to write the idea. Once the idea is picked, you are supported with seed funds and you begin to establish. So some are making juices, some are making all kinds of cereals packaged in a very well and nice way where they can disseminate. Some also set up schools. So there are some schools that I visited where the returnee had come back, particularly the man this time was home. The children wife were somewhere in the UK, and he was managing the school together with his cousins and his family members. So some set up schools, and when you ask them, the motivation one is to support the country and also help the country with what at least they have achieved elsewhere. But I mean, one thing that is prominent is that they don't cut their ties. So some of them, their ties support them, help them. Their ties with outside or with the destination were a means by which they could find money to sustain the businesses they have because of the economic situation.
Thanks, Prof. We would like to sort of wrap up the conversation with two more questions. And so I'm curious about policies and your policy angle. And I'm wondering if you could speak to the policy measures to ensure that returnees can, or even people who decide to remain, can leverage Indigenous knowledge for both economic and social transformation. And how can these policies be tailored to address the challenges that young people, especially and women, face?
Yeah, so I mean, when it comes to the young, the African population is highly youthful. So we have a lot of energy in our system. We need to we break the ground. Sometimes we even need to do other things. So we cannot take that out of our system. That's why the employment rate is also high. It means that no matter the levels we produce, we still have to produce more to satisfy everybody. But the system, so for instance, when in some years back when the Libya issue happened, we took the students from the Center for Migration Studies to go and talk to the returnees who had just come. And so we're asking them about why they came back and how the situation in Libya at that time had effect on them. And so all of them had come into a farming community and they were willing to farm. But the problem was the land. So land is an issue. So unlike before where we had vast lands where people could easily farm, whether in larger quantities or smaller quantities. The land ownership, it's a challenge. Again, the nature of farming is still subsistence. We have not modernized to allow the use of improved technology. Yes, in terms of pesticides and fertilizers, I think we have moved, we've advanced a bit, but we still need to advance the inputs, the farm inputs, to make them much more modernized and even at an affordable rate where people can leverage on. Credit facilities are important. And so even without international migration, many other people, so there is this project I'm on, we are looking at social transformation and migration in peri-urban and urban communities. And you find that the farmlands are virtually empty. In some cases, they have left the women and the old elderly people there because all the young men have migrated. But we are also finding that even the young females are no more staying behind. So because of the cultural issues, for instance, if you, in some cultures, particularly from the northern part of Ghana to the south, if you are migrating as a wife, you need permission of your husband. If you are migrating as a daughter, you need permission from your father. So the women are migrating without seeking consent, because if they do, they may not be allowed to. But once they come into the cities and make money and they go back, they are respected. And so now they begin to have voices to contribute to community development. And so the mode of transforming our farms and our produce is a challenge. This is something that we can broadly look at to ensure that the policy address some of these fundamentals in the origin countries. Yes, you want everybody to go back home, which some government strategies have seen because of urbanization, the influx of youth, or sometimes in our case, the headquarters coming from the northern part to the city as a problem. So they see rural urban migration as a problem because they develop slums, they lead to development of slums, they overcrowding. But sending them back is not the option. It's just like Europe, also bringing the people back is not the option. It's about development back home. What is there for them to do? What can we provide to make people sustainable? So sustainable return, it's something, or return that is meaningful. It's something that we need to look at. How people taking advantage of the circumstance and getting the opportunities from there. I hope that we get to a point where migration is not a force, but it's a choice where you decide whether you want to move or not. Europe, you decide whether you move. If you have the money, you go. But in our case, even when you have everything at your disposal, you still need to think about that consular who is going to refuse you visa. And so we need to get to a point, but we can get to that point if we look at policies that will target one, industrialization, one, agricultural advancement, where we can use better and improved technology for our farming activities. I know that in various contexts, some of these things have been implemented. So for instance, I mentioned the Senegal case where they have, in Ghana, it's a similar approach, but we call it we call it planting for food and for jobs. So we call it planting for food and for jobs. So you are planting one to curb the food insecurity, but again, it's also a form of employment for the youth. I don't know how far we went with that. I don't think we achieved what we wanted to achieve, but that's the same application when you go to Senegal. And I believe it's a lot of targets. These are the targets within the sub-region. So it's a strategic move that we need to do to make sure that people have jobs. And we are promoting also classroom and university education without experience. So yes, people go to the university, but internship and industrialization, that gives the capacity and the innovation, it's not there. And I remember when I finished school, I wanted to start something on my own. Where was the credit? I kicked my head against everything, but I couldn't start. So some people have the urged to start their own businesses, but the capital, the credit to start is also not available. So policies broadly can target that. I also know that more recently, government is looking at skills partnership, where the major destination countries are partnering with origin countries to transfer skills in a very cordial way, where there can be a triple win approach. The country benefits, the host benefits, the migrant benefits, the family benefits, so that it's not a drain. So you train enough so that you can also export some. For instance, in the health sector, whether we like it or not, whether we accept it or not, even though WHO has a red list, countries are recruiting from our various countries. So you go to Nigeria, you go to Senegal, you come to Ghana. Recruitment of health professionals, particularly the young and the experienced, is happening. And so why would you not take advantage of it? Because you also have a pool of health professionals which you don't have money to employ them. So we could actually sit down, instead of brain drain, we could gain the brain by entering into some analysis or some critical decisions where we take advantage of the moment. Because Europe and the North Americas would definitely need the young African scholars, the young African, whether skilled or less skilled, to fill in some vacancies that cannot be filled. So that is already the fundamental that we can all agree on. Then we need to promote. How do we move ahead? And I think this should not be difficult for us to achieve as Africans.
Thank you so much, Prof. We've come to the end of the discussion.
Thank you so much for your responses that were very, poignant. So thanks.
You are welcome. So all the best, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you for tuning in to Safui, the podcast of the Africa Indigenous Knowledge Research Network. Our aim is to complement existing initiatives on the regeneration and application of indigenous knowledge for sustainable livelihoods, while identifying promising areas for African women's and youth entrepreneurship and employment across various sectors. The network is headquartered at the Institute of African Studies, Carleton University, with partnerships across the African continent. Want to stay engaged? Connect with us on YouTube at AIKRN Online, or consider applying to join our network at africaindigenousresearch.com. Until next time, keep the dialogue going.